So I do know that I had recorded things. We had shot sequences that got cut. For the life of me, I can't remember what those are, but I do remember recording things and then feeling sad that they got cut, because I thought, oh, that was a good performance. But there's always a reason, like for why. Like you're removing the fat, you're streamlining a little bit, or maybe there was like a something else that had to happen after my stage further down that was going to be too costly, and a decision was made to put that effort towards something else. So it hurts to see stuff, but ultimately it's improving the game. Sometimes you have to remove things to make things better.
That's where the consensus has to happen. There has to be a discussion, because again, like I mentioned, it's a huge project with lots of connective tissue that has to be discussed. And again, that's why we have a big team of leadership that can discuss it. It's absolutely vital in a project that size.
Did you see the cinematics in Baldur's Gate 3 and wonder how the heck Larian pulled that all off? Have you ever been in a situation where time was tight, priorities were changing, and people were looking at you to fix things? Ever needed to keep a team moving on time and at quality while it seemed like the world wouldn't stop shifting around you? Today, we are talking to two leaders of Larian's narrative and world-building team who helped guide the process and vision for what good world-building and cutscenes look like in Baldur's Gate 3. John O'Brien is a producer at Larian, and Greg Lidstone is the director of animation. They worked with their teams to overcome the challenges of adapting and creating a world through animation and cinematics that players would love while the story was still in development. John, Greg, it's great to have you on. How's it going?
Good, Ben. Thanks very much.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much.
So I originally had thought about this and framed it from very much the cinematics perspective, but you both let me know that actually there was a world-building element to this as well when it came to looking at animations, looking at these pipelines that you're building. So can you just describe what were your roles at Larian on BG3?
Sure. John, do you want to go first?
Sure. As a producer yourself, Ben, I'm sure you're familiar with being bounced around a little bit throughout projects as needs arise.
Yep.
So I started in the writing department as a producer on BG3, and as the project got bigger and more complex, and the pipeline started to swell a bit, myself and a couple of other producers were moved into a new role, which was essentially a horizontal producer. So we don't work with one individual department, we work across multiple departments. In my capacity, that was working with our scripters, our writers, our narrative design team, level design, combat, cinematics, and a couple of others to basically take portions of the game from paper and take them through to the final product.
Nice.
Yeah, and like you said before, I'm the director of animation, but that is sort of a new thing that I've been moved into just after BG3 shipped. So on BG3, I was called the performance director, and what that kind of entailed was any of the custom requests that came from the cinematic team for custom animation, any kind of the special moves, combat moves that weren't related to gameplay were sort of planned and figured out and structured by my team, and we recorded all that stuff. And then we also interacted really heavily with Pit Stop, who was the team that was doing a lot of the voice recording with the actors in the booth and all of the mocap associated with that. So there was a lot of coordination with that team, and it was just my job to sort of try to bring those different groups together and try to get something that is kind of a consistent vision for the way that the characters move.
I think a lot of people think about game development through the lens of, hey, here's all the stuff we have to do, let's go do it. Let's get the list of tasks out, let's plan this all out. And while there's aspects of that are sometimes true, the real value of video games and their success, I think, often depends on the ways in which we deviate from what we expected to have happen in a positive way. And when, John, you were originally describing what you did, it felt like nothing was certain as you were going through, right? If someone had made a list and they'd been like, hey, for the next 6 months, we're going to be working on these things, in a month, that whole list was upside down, not just from a like, hey, how are we necessarily working, because we're constantly learning about that. Also, just from a what are the important elements of the story that we're trying to capture cinematically. And Greg, you kind of have the downstream of that, that you're constantly sort of responding to. So talk about a little bit about that environment, the complexity of the space, where it wasn't just, here's 10 things, make sure you get them done by 3 months from now or whatever.
Yeah, I think it kind of sounds a bit like we were stumbling around in the dark, which isn't really the case.
Not intended. Did not intend that.
Not intended. No, just to clarify, it's really a case of, if you want to make something as huge and complex as Baldur's Gate, you have to be willing to pivot and adjust, because the story, we have a lot of the major beats were there and planned out from the very beginning, and they knew where they wanted to go. But it's such a huge beast that in order to flesh those story beats out and make them all work in unison, and to, someone might come up with a really great edge case that we should be able to work with, and that the players might want to do, and we have to factor that in. So that's where a lot of the flux comes from, and we have a really good team who are able to do that. People are discovering these elements all the way through the pipeline. It's not kind of just one small team who figure this stuff out, like our scripters and our writers and our combat people and our systems people. Everybody is involved in figuring out kind of all these different nuances that should be able to happen within the story, systemically, as well as through dialogues or other elements in the game. The sad side of that is that it does mean that sometimes, per Greg and other departments who are further down the waterfall, get squished a little because we decide there's something really cool that we definitely have to have. And that might mean that there's a very complex scene that we hadn't initially planned for, that's going to require a lot of work in animation and cinematics, or other departments that we hadn't intended. But luckily we work in a company where we don't go, well, we didn't plan for this, so we're not going to do it. Everyone shuffles, and we work together, and we do a bit of horse trading, and we figure out how can we make this work, and how can we make it as beautiful and interesting as possible.
Mm-hmm. And something went right, because you're both talking to each other still. So yeah, I want to hear, Greg, what's your side of it?
I mean, it comes down to iteration and revision, and we're really lucky that our studio is structured in such a way that we're allowed to analyze the state of what we've done, and if something isn't working the way we want to, we are given that leeway to go back and change stuff, and that sort of works on all levels. Like it works at the writer's level when they're sort of concepting the entire plan, and then they realize they missed something and they want to go back and they want to sweeten something up. And it matters for the people further down the stream, of like the VFX artist and the sound artist who they look at it and go, oh, actually that didn't turn out the way I wanted to. I need to go back and I need to make those revisions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a really lucky situation. And
there's so many things I could go into there. The first one that came to mind is the structure. You talked about a structure that allowed decision making at almost every level of the organization. How was that structure set up?
I mean, I showed up 3 years ago on this team, and it was kind of a part of what Larian is a little bit about. I think it's because Larian sort of comes from an indie space. People's opinions and ideas are valid at every level of the studio. It doesn't matter who you are. It matters whether the idea is strong enough and it delivers the emotional impact and the visceralness that we want from our scenes. And I think that's just something that existed in the culture. And then when I sort of rolled in, it was already here.
And just to add to what Greg said, like, absolutely, that was like, I've been here, I think maybe 6-7 months longer than Greg, just so like we're both in Larian terms relatively new. Mm-hmm. We've got the Larian dinosaurs who are there 20 years plus, and there's quite a few of them. the real thing is that like they're also very particular about who they hire, and that's not to kind of blow our own trumpets or anything like that, but it's about not only finding someone who can do the work that they're looking for, but someone who's a good cultural fit, who has kind of the same values and goals as Larian does within game design. So they're very particular about the people that they want working on the projects. And I think that really shows, because we've gone from, I think it was 80-ish people in DOS 2 up to 450-ish by BG3.
Wow.
So to retain a culture,
yeah, it's hard.
Through that like monumental growth is a huge testament to the people in there making those decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Another thing that popped up, you were talking about people being more interested in what we're trying to produce and being proud of what we're trying to produce than in checking the box that I finished my thing for the day. And I think that's, if I asked most companies, I think they'd say, yeah, we want that. But it doesn't always play out. And I hear in what you're saying an alignment around a goal state. Like there's something we're trying to hit. And we all kind of get that. And so when the VFX artist looks at what the work they've done in game or in the cinematic cutscene, and they go, I can do that better, and this is how. And you go, you know what? Go ahead, take that time. Yeah, let's do that better. What keeps you, or what guides you from the times where you say, you know what, it's good enough, let's roll with it, versus yeah, let's go ahead, take that again, see if we, because that's going to cost time and we're not doing something else.
Sorry, John, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, it is a difficult balancing act. We do have some kind of producery metric ways of managing some of this stuff. I can remember a few cases where, the discussion takes place and we can very quickly come to a logical decision, because we've got a huge amount of data from early access that we can pull from. So there's things like we look at a really cool idea, we can say, oh, this, a really cool edge case, if you are specifically a dark elf ranger could be put in here. And, we go, how much resources should we put into making that a reality?
Mm-hmm.
If we can look at our metrics and go, well, that's 0.25% of players, we know straight away we need to keep this relatively simple. We still want everything to have impact. I think the floor for what Larian tries to produce with things is quite high.
Mm-hmm.
The ceiling goes way into, raising Greg's blood pressure. But the floor even at that is quite good. We'll never just go, it's fine. Fine is not good enough. It's always, let's make it good, let's make it fun.
Yeah, there's a saying that animators, they don't ever finish a scene. The scene just gets taken away from them. Because animators we love to polish, right? We love to noodle and play with the curve editor and just make things absolutely perfect. But I mean, it's like John says, it's a return on investment. If there is something that someone is proposing that will impact the player and their enjoyment, and will hit that note that we're trying to hit, then that is kind of a no-brainer.
So the orientation there is towards the player. Is the ownership of that decision something that lands on particular people, or is that something that's shared by the team? I mean, there's probably some blend of it, but at some point someone has to make a call. And John, is that you, like, hey, I'm pulling out the production metrics. This is 0.17% of the population. I think it is good and fun, but it's not the most amazing. That's probably okay. Or how is that made? Is there somebody there who's like, I'm the shot caller on this?
I don't think there's ever been a case where there's one shot caller. Okay. I think it's generally something where we have all of our directors and leads who talk to each other. The communication is generally very good, and it's it's generally a decision by committee. There's times where someone who has all of the information, or at least the lion's share of the information in certain circumstances, might be Sven, and he'll say, okay, look, we need to drop everything and work on this thing. Whatever you're working on now, that goes on the finish it, or else it gets put on hold until we have more time down the line, or whatever the case may be. But it doesn't happen very often. It's generally something where it is a consensus that people come to when we discuss it. It's never a case of production comes in and goes, okay, everybody down tools, that's it, you're finished.
Pencils down, class.
Yeah.
I mean, there is deadlines are a very real thing, and there is people's time and people's money that is dependent on you hitting certain deadlines. So you're always balancing that. Like, you've got to hit a deadline, but how are you going to spend those last couple of hours before you hit the deadline? What are the things you're going to focus on? And we're given an amount of flexibility as to choose what is the most important thing. And I think that's nice that while, production and senior leadership make calls on things, they also trust department heads and the team heads and leadership within the teams to make those calls. Like, we were hired and put into these positions because we were seen as being good at their job for whatever reason, and they've allowed us to make those decisions. And that's not particularly fulfilling if every time I said I need to reshoot this, I was second guessed by everybody, and they didn't trust.
John comes running in with his clipboard and he's like, "No, we need to get to the next scene."
Yeah, it's like, no, I know we can make up that time later. Yeah. Like, we will do this. We'll balance that out. I mean, that's a fairly simple leadership tactic of just trust your people to make the right decision, and allow them to make those right decisions.
I hear in that, you just said one that was coming to mind for me. So a bit ago you said we're hiring people that we think are going to culturally match the indie vibe we're trying to create here, that everybody can be heard. We have a high degree of autonomy, and we can do that because we hired people who we trust to do their job well, and to have something else you mentioned, the best interest of the player in mind all the time, right? So that there is actually some shared vision. There will be subtle differences because there's some subjectivity about like what is good enough, what is fun enough, like that sort of thing. But broadly, we know everybody's going in the same direction. I am curious, who sets that direction when it came to BG3 overall? Like, how did you know this is good enough, this is fun enough, this is in line with the feel that we're trying to hit, or the whatever it is, when it came to either individual scenes or just overall?
Are we talking about in the game in general, or specifically the cinema? So it's Sven, who is very hands-on, involved in. Well, he's the creative director. I mean, there is very little going on in the creation of the game that Sven was not involved in. Or at least was there was nothing in the game that Sven was unaware of. Wow. Like, he gets involved. He wants to know. He needs to know. He's trying to craft a narrative and a story, and then turn it into a game that people will enjoy. So he looks into all things and asks the important questions of us, and sort of sets that this is the kind of game I'm making. Come along and let's make this idea together. And I think he holds a really strong vision. I worked at several studios in my career, and the most successful ones that I've worked at are ones where there is a really clear creative vision at the top that you can understand, that is easily defendable, that is understandable. It is can be sort of distilled down to a simple idea that they can sort of sell you, and then you can take that idea and add to it and support it in whatever department you're in.
Yeah, I think it's like Greg said. Sven kind of defined what his priorities were in making this game, what he wanted it to do, how he wanted it to feel, and how deep he wanted us to go with it. And then from that kind of foundation, we've incredible people who started to define things in early access, like what our combat system would be like, how we would adapt 5th edition to work digitally, which is a mammoth task in its own right.
I think many places that have a single creative director who seems like they're as involved can often go to a place of, hey, there's important people who make decisions and there's everybody else whose job it is just to execute those decisions. And I get quite the opposite from you, which probably is a credit to Sven and also credit to the leaders around and obviously to the team to respond to that well. But I'm curious, as I say all this, like what comes up for you? How do you think about this, the combination of this very strong top vision with also the high autonomy of people to iterate and figure things out on their own?
I think the thing is people are always looking to put something in that's going to surprise Sven, that's going to, give him that little bit of joy. He has an incredibly uncanny ability to be player zero, like the first person to play the game. He can almost wipe his memory every time he boots the game up again. I have no idea how he does it, but he can always play the game with fresh eyes. So putting in new things that are going to catch his attention and surprise him or shock him or bring him that little giggle because it's a slightly gruesome moment or a slightly risque moment or whatever. Like we've a lot of people who know what he likes and trust that what he likes is what people are going to like. So people are always there's always an endeavor to do that. And that gives people a lot of creative freedom because they can push the envelope a little bit and they can maybe surprise him with something that he really likes that he didn't think he would or that he didn't think of before himself. So you're playing to an audience always. It's just that the first member of our audience is Sven always.
One of the things I learned since being here is you tend to be more successful if you're making a game for yourself. If you make something that you would want to play, that excites you, that you wish someone had made for you to do. Generally, there's people out there who have the same feeling, that want that same kind of game to be made. And I think that exists a lot with the people at Larian. We're just making games that are like, yeah, I'd like to play this, and the kind of the benefit is the game is so big that quite often it's like it's unknowable. Like there's lots in the game that I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
So you get surprised by the game all the time because people are putting new stuff in there all the time. So it's really delightful to sort of play through the game and discover what's being added in there, even in the sort of the early stages, because I know that I'm going to get to work on that later on when it gets to the cinematic level. That I'm going to get to shoot that action sequence when that shows up. And it's just, it's really, really enjoyable.
Love it. Okay, so the thing I wanted to ask, John, I'm going to start with you on this. What was the hardest thing you as a producer encountered and had to overcome as it related to Baldur's Gate 3 getting out the door?
I think the toughest thing is that you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. The story was still evolving and still being refined and tidied up as we were trying to finish the game, because we get to the point where we have all of our story threads that we've created in Act 1 and branched out into Act 2, and now we have to bring them all together into neat, logical endings at the end. And then you add on to that the level of complexity that we have with the origin system that we use. So you have all of your companions with branching storylines of their own, but you could also be one of them as your player character and having to account for all of that and all the different relationships that they could be in, who's alive, who's dead, who romance to, who's angry at who, and then weaving those throughout the main storyline. So it was a giant branching beautiful thing that gave me a lot of sleepless nights. But trying to figure out how to come up with estimates of what that's actually going to be in hard numbers, so that I can then talk with the writing department to say, here's how many dialogues I think it's going to be, and here's how complex I think they might be.
What was something you learned that helped you succeed at that over your time at BG3, where like you started out and you didn't know this thing, and by the end you did, and it was like that really helped me have less sleepless nights or get better estimates or have more of a positive impact?
Honestly, I think it was the change of position, because when I started in writing, I'm trying to estimate it based on just how many dialogues is this likely to be, how many lines is that likely to be, and you know that kind of where it stopped. And then when I moved into the region producer position, that meant that I was dealing with a lot more departments, and it was actually being able to draw on the knowledge of the different leads who I was interacting with a lot more. It made my life so much easier, because I could go and I could grab Graham in the cinematics department and say, hey, here's some things I just want to run past you. Here's what I've identified as some potential, difficulties that might occur for downstream departments. Can we chat through what might be difficult for cinematics in your mind? And he was able to run me through and go, 50% of these are totally fine. The other 50%, maybe, 10 of them or something I'll be really worried about. The rest are, we'll manage. And, he'll help me put some estimates to that. So I think it was actually just, part of it was just getting over myself a little bit and just going, hey, I have no idea. Can you help me figure this stuff out so that next time I have a better idea?
So I'm going to try to reflect back to you then, what I hear in that is one thing that helped was when your view broadened to see more of the entirety of the pipeline, and also as part of that, you became much more comfortable with what you didn't know and just going in with what you didn't know and just asking, and simultaneously trusting that the other people are going to cover and help. If you're missing something, somebody else has got it. And they're gonna tell you, or they're gonna like see the thing where you're like, okay, here's the whatever dashboard, whatever it is, and they're gonna be like, hang on, I think that one's wrong. And that, again, both those things take pressure off of you. It's like, oh, it's okay for me not to know, and if I slip up, there's other people that are happy to cover, just like I'm gonna cover for them if they slip up.
That's it. It's not even just specifically with slip up. It's just that it's just catching the information that's there. Like there's a huge number of data points throughout Baldur's Gate, and I deal with one very specific area of it. That's not even thinking about all of the different stats and spells and abilities and things that go on in the background that make everything that's not a cinematic. It's really fun.
Yeah.
So like there's all of those details are things that we have to factor in the storytelling, and I can't keep all of that in my head. So we need our scripters and our systems guys to come in and say, hey, but what would happen if you threw a fireball at this person mid-conversation while your multiplayer party is having is talking to them? Or, if you're talking with, I don't know, the tieflings in the Druid Grove and saying, hey, we've saved you, but at the same time, one of your party is, blown up part of the grove, how should Zevlor react in that circumstance? Should he pivot to then, be against you and say, hey, what are you doing? Or should he continue the conversation like nothing's happened? All of these things are things that we need to factor in.
Yeah.
They're not always the things I would think of, because I'm, strictly, at the time, at least at the beginning, strictly thinking in kind of writing terms. So having someone who can come at you with that information and ask those questions is brilliant. And that's why it's really important to have that overlap.
Mm-hmm. So,
and not just with producers, but with departments in general.
I think that's a really interesting life lesson, is realizing that you can't have all the answers all the time, and getting really comfortable with saying, I don't know, I need to find out, I have to look into stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like sort of early on when I was pushed into sort of a leadership role, it's you assume you need to have the answers all the time. And it's really hard those first couple of times when you're like, I don't know the answer. But there's a level of comfort in that, of like knowing that you can say to the team, like, I don't know the answer, but the question is super important, so let me go and figure out how to find that for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really good, and it's a good life lesson to sort of get your head wrapped around.
Love it. Okay, yeah. So for you, what was the hardest thing?
Yeah, my answer is not as astute as his. It's the complexity of the kind of games that we make that it was the hardest part for me, especially when dealing with actors. So I'm dealing with an actor or two actors, and I get them to do a scene for me, and then I'm like, okay, great. Now you're a dwarf and she's a dragonborn, so we got to do it as close to what we just did, but again at different heights. And now we do it another time, but we have to keep that consistency of timing and consistency of like performance and still emotional impact. And it's that trickiness, but it's kind of what you signed up for at this point. Like I sometimes I dream of doing a single player like corridor type game, and I'm sure there's problems. I'm sure those are very very difficult, but they're just a different set of problems. But it's these games are very complicated with a lot of moving parts for a lot of different teams.
Yeah. So for you then, what was the learning that you would say you most took away from that in the 3 years you've been there?
It's really going to go to planning ahead of time and having a really solid approach for what the day is going to be. And that's working with a producer and working with the cinematic artists and the cinematic animators to get all the information I need from them of like, what is the point of this shot? What are the moves that we need? What are the little, like, give me 3 or 4 major points that you need me to hit. And then tell me where the wiggle room is so that I can have the actors play and come up with cool ideas and we can expand past that. But you give me the non-negotiables for this scene. Like, the character has to do this thing, then they have to do this thing, and then they have to do this thing. And then I have sort of free reign to work with the actor and try to do something creative within that. And having those answers and having that all scheduled out definitely makes the day go easier.
Part of game development is cutting stuff. I've never, ever, ever heard anybody tell me, yes, we shipped a game with everything we'd planned to ship on time, and it all just went out the door, no problem. There's always cutting stuff. How were you two related to that, and what did that process look like?
So I do know that I had recorded things. We had shot sequences that got cut. For the life of me, I can't remember what those are, but I do remember recording things and then feeling sad that they got cut because I thought, oh, that was a good performance. But there's always a reason. Like for why, like you you're removing the fat, you're streamlining a little bit, or maybe there was like a something else that had to happen after my stage further down that was going to be too costly, and a decision was made to put that effort towards something else. So it hurts to see stuff, but ultimately it's improving the game. Sometimes you have to remove things to make things better.
Yeah. I think I experienced it a bit earlier in the pipeline. It was generally we'd be working through our estimates. We'd be looking at kind of what we've done so far, how much we have built, how big the game is getting, how much time we have to finish, and how much we can conceivably fit within that space of time. The thing that I really admired and really liked about how we went about it was we didn't just go, we don't have time to do this, we're just going to cut this whole area off and that's it gone. Our game isn't modular enough to do that. I think that works if you've kind of got, a self-contained area within the game that isn't going to be largely impactful. We don't build areas like that, unfortunately. Everything feeds into everything, more or less. The stories lined up with everything. So anytime we did have to make some cuts, the first port to call was to go straight back to our core story team to figure out, can we still thread everything together by the end? Can we still make sense of this? What are the holes in the story created by any cuts that we do make? So that the story was never sacrificed because we didn't have time.
And I think that it's a logical part of making games. But if we cut a side mission and then reaped the benefit of like more Halcyon content, or like now you can take Karlak out for dinner, right? Like these are correct decisions, like of where we're gonna. It's that return on investment of what's going to impact the player the most. And so you see things get cut, and that's hurt, but you see the benefit of where we can then put those resources afterwards. I think that's important to sort of weigh that all the time.
I mean, like there, weekly we have meetings with all the leads and producers throughout the whole development of Baldur's Gate, and concerns are raised there, and people will put in proposals for saying things like, we want to get rid of this, or we're not sure we can finish this, or we would like to add this, and all of these conversations go in, and it was just, sometimes it was great and efficient, and sometimes it was messy because there's a lot of voices in there, but generally it was a really useful way of people putting forward proposals and then immediately being able to tell what the knock-on effect of that option is. Like, if we remove this, what does that mean? At times a cut can actually create more work than it saves, because if we can't, if we decide that we want to try cut a particular aspect of the story, we go, okay, that's great, but we have put in the seeds of that story in 27 dialogues in Act 1 that we might have to go back and get those actors back in and re-record some notes and redo some scenes and all of this type of stuff. So, that's where the consensus has to happen. There has to be a discussion, because, again, like I mentioned, it's a huge project with lots of connective tissue that has to be discussed. And again, not that's why we have a big team of leadership that can discuss it. It's absolutely vital in a project that size.
Yeah. Did somebody have like a map of what you're talking about, the connective tissue between the different story elements, and okay, cool, this connects to this connects to this, and sort of tried to maintain that? I can only imagine how, the number of permutations and different threads that are part of the main stories of this just are immense.
We tried at times to map it. Mapping it is nearly as complex as making Baldur's Gate 3 was, to be honest. It was a very difficult process. Generally, I have to say, to their credit, similar with what Greg said with the city artists, for specific characters, we obviously kept one writer and generally one scripter assigned to those characters as well. And they would be the ones, like the keepers of knowledge for that character, and they would say, hey, we can do these 5 different things in Act 1 with this character, and here's what these 5 different things could potentially do as we move into Act 2, Act 3. So we generally, it was very much a committee-based thing. People, we talk a lot. The writers are involved in lots of discussions, as well as the cine artists and the scripters, because they hold a lot of that information. We are attempting to try and keep that a bit more formatted for my sanity, just so I can keep up with it and understand what's there. But honestly, it's quite a difficult thing to keep all these things aligned, and they change a lot.
Right, yeah.
So, if we tried to put together like a Confluence page with all this information, it would be outdated by this time tomorrow. So it's better to allow it to kind of progress the way it is, and then when it's a bit more settled and concrete, we can start mapping out some of those things. But as we start to come up with cool ideas for the next act and the act after that and everything else, again, it could change. So it's we have lots of documents, and we keep those documents moving, and they're live. But it's not something that we tend to map, because it's not it instantly becomes out of date and unreliable, and then people start holding on to unreliable information.
The level of complexity and the fact that almost trying to map it would have been a fool's errand, just because of how rapidly it was changing, which meant that we had to rely on the people who knew. Like, it's an organic thing, not a built thing, if that makes sense. It's not it's not a machine we're building. It's an organic thing that's growing, and we have to just trust that everybody's in the right, we have enough people in the right spots, remembering the right things, and move forward without that perfect single source of truth that probably everybody at some point was like, I wish I had that, but simultaneously, actually no, actually the cost of that is too high.
And it's out of date as soon as it's written.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how fast sometimes we're kind of working.
Mm-hmm. And I do think it ties back into the whole indie company ethos, because in an indie company, the expectation is that someone is going to identify the thing that they need to just take ownership of. It's like, right, I'm gonna own this. This will be my thing. I'll hold on to information. I make sure I keep it up to date, and that I know what the relevant information is, and that I can tell anyone else who needs to know it. And that is fostered throughout the company at all levels. It's not something that's just at director level or at Sven level. That's at every level.
Yeah.
That people are given responsibility to and the opportunity to take ownership of things and be the owner of things.
You've mentioned a couple of times the way we made decisions was we talked about it. The way we made decisions is we got out of the room and we chatted and whatever that looked like. There's a lot of people out there who go, I don't want to talk to people, I want to do work. And I'm sure, by the way, you both felt that and had people at Larian who would beat that drum. And I think it's actually a really smart drum to beat, right? Because we can spend too much time in meetings. How did you hold that balance of, hey, you know what? It's really important. We get together to talk about this, both in the Greg in your space where it's like we're trying to figure out, was that good enough? How are we going to do this? What does that day look like? Again, that's probably conversation, a lot of conversations, and simultaneously, every time we're in a conversation, we're not sitting at our desks, we're not getting our work done, whatever that means. How did you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, like meetings. Yeah, there's always too many meetings. But if you use them correctly and you structure them correctly, and you're not wasting time and you're not going down rabbit holes on things, and you're focused, like these are the things we're going to discuss and the decisions. And by the time we leave this meeting, we either have a decision made or we know where to go to get that decision made. I think they can be useful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the other thing with communication as well is that, like Greg said, there's always a lot of meetings. There's often too many meetings. A lot of decisions have to be made and things like that. But again, one of the things I've learned through BG3 is just go and talk to people. Instead of trying to find a slot in the calendar to fit a meeting with 20 people or 15 people or whatever the case might be, it makes more sense for me to go individually to a couple of people to do some reconnaissance to figure out exactly what information do I need.
Yeah, I had a conversation with one of the other department heads recently, and we were talking about how sometimes you just make the decision, just get moving. Like there's you can call all these people into a room and stuff like that, but sometimes you just have to make the decision with the best possible information that you have, and just move ahead with it as quickly as you can. And it's just sort of this idea of like just get it done, like just go, like because otherwise there's going to be so much kind of back and forth that sometimes it's better to just ask for that forgiveness afterwards of like, well, I made the decision, I moved ahead, like that was based on the best piece of information that I had at the time, and 90%, 85%, maybe it works out for you.
Yeah.
Keep your fingers crossed. Like
saves you a lot of time.
Well, but you can't constantly hem and haw, and like you gather as much information as you can. I totally agree with just going and talking to people as quickly and just going straight to the source of information if you can, and then just make the call and move on.
I wanted to ask you stuff about the game itself. So in your opinion, what character changed the most over the course of development from where it started to where it ended based on that change in evolution and growth?
I do know that like Karlak was kind of a minor character to begin with, but everybody loved the character so much that she grew and evolved into a much more interesting character with a much more really fleshed out background that we all just sort of fell in love with.
How much did early access change how you approached what you were doing?
I don't know if it changed how we approach things. It probably, well, not probably. It definitely informed certain decisions of, how much time and effort we should put into certain aspects. But I don't think it would have changed our approach to how we're actually building it. I think it just established things, and it helped us to refine our ideas and see what the priorities for the player were, which is, that's invaluable information when you're trying to make a game.
I mean, I hold BG3 up as an example of early access done incredibly well. Just the amount of content you put out, the level of finish of the game, so many things. I'm not saying everybody can copy that because everybody's got a different genre, a different game that they're building, but I thought it was brilliant. Like from the outside, again, just another game developer out there, I was like, this was really sharp, and I think to your point, it stoked a fire for like, I want Act 2, I want Act 3. I'm looking forward to when this comes out. Okay, so for both of you, favorite race and class to play as?
You want to go first, Craig?
I usually play Rogue, and I usually play Tiefling. I think the horns look amazing. And then favorite origin character.
I'm going to cause problems with you and the actors now. They're going to be mad at you no matter what you say.
Yeah. I probably Asterion. I would probably stick with Asterion. Yeah.
Favorite racing class to play as? It is Tiefling as well, and a monk. Just not having to have a weapon and just asking everyone to catch these hands as you can go through the whole game is just a really good feeling, and it's done really well in the game. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And again, it's completely subjective, but I just think the Tieflings look beautiful in the game. I thought they were done so well. Favorite origin is a contentious point because Origins was like my remit in the game, so that's difficult. My favorite origin companion is probably Shadowheart, but I think if you're not going to play as a player character, one of the best ways to experience the game is to play as Will, because his storyline is great, but it's so much more engrossing when it's your story. And also, if you're going to play as Will, you have to romance Karlach, because that progress of being like enemies to friends, friends to lovers is just a beautiful arc in the game, and it's done really, really well. So yeah, that if I'm not playing as a generated character, that's what I would do, and I advise everyone else to as well. Nice.
Okay, this podcast is for leaders in game dev. You've shipped an astonishingly good game, a game that when it came out had the internet asking how in the world did you do this. We haven't hit all of that in this episode, but I'm curious, what haven't we talked about that would be your advice to leaders in game dev as they're out there trying to make amazing games in all the different genres that exist and all the different places that exist?
I'm going to go back to just two things I kind of hit on. It's make the game that you want to play, and trust your people. You hired them for their reason, and just let them do something creative. Let them surprise you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with that entirely. The other thing I think that was great for us was show a bit of your own personality. As a company, like, we weren't afraid to be quirky and wacky and a little bit cringe at times with our panel from hell and everything else, but being visible and open and engaging with the community throughout the process, and being able to talk about the game and stuff like that was really helpful. Like, you get a lot of feedback, people start to feel like they know you and start to trust you as developers, and I think when they can see that, they engage a lot more with you, and that was our experience. At least we got so much back from the players throughout the whole process, and even now still. So I think engage with your community. They are the people you're trying to make a game for as well. Like, make it for yourself, but it never hurts to get some advice from outside as well.
Love it. All right. As we wrap, anywhere either of you want to point people to, places to check out?
My socials are boring. It's fine.
I mean, I don't have anything outside of work.
I was gonna say I'm definitely putting at least the Larian Studios. I'll put their website in this one if people want to check that out. Greg even said earlier he was hiring people, so if you're in those, go check out the roles he has open. And also Baldur's Gate 3, I'll put their website. That website also in the show notes. Check out the game if you haven't. You've probably heard of it. It's worth playing. John and Greg, thanks a ton for coming on. I appreciate just sharing, you both sharing some of the details of what it was like building such an amazing game. So thanks a lot.
Anytime. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Okay, thanks for listening. Here's a quick summary of what we talked about. First, to make something amazing and large, you are going to need to be pivoting, and the organization needs to be comfortable with that. Second, hire people who you trust to do their jobs, even if they sometimes disagree with you. Then let them make calls. Second-guessing everything will slow it all down. Third, Sven's ability to see the game from a new player's eyes was a great advantage for the team. This is worth cultivating within your studio. Build the game that you want to play. Fourth, being a leader does not mean having the answer all the time. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's a huge part of any complex leadership role. Fifth, you are going to have to cut things in game dev. It's just the way it is. Get used to it. Sixth, if something is changing rapidly, trying to document it may be a fool's errand. Instead, trust your people to make good decisions and do your best to give them the basics that they need to make those good decisions. Seventh, meetings can be useful in decision-making, but don't jump to them if you can just go talk to someone one-on-one, and don't let meetings or process prevent you from making a call that you have the info to make. Eighth, don't be scared to show your personality as an individual and as a studio in the game that you're making. All right, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. Did you enjoy this episode? If you did and are looking for more conversations like this one, join the Building Better Games Discord community. It's for leaders and producers in game dev who are frustrated with solving the wrong problems and who want to share experiences and learn how to lead and build better games. Check out the show notes to join. I'll see you there.